Welcome to Adult Meditative Mind Stories. The chance to calm your body, ground your energy, and open up your creative mind. Spending just a few moments of time relaxing into a passive state while listening to a series of Mother West Wind wise stories from 1910, published by Thorton W. Burgess. Just find a quiet space, free from distraction, allowing yourself to be transported to a magical land of talking critters who are full of wisdom and insights, designed to fill your heart, warm your soul, and ignite your creative and intuitive mind. Today's story is Why Jimmy Skunk Never Hurries. The merry little breezes of old Mother West Wind had just been released from their big bag, in which she carries them every night to their home behind the purple hills, and every morning brings them back to the green meadows to romp and play all day. They romped and raced and danced away, some one way, some another, to see whom they could find to play with. Presently, some of them had spied Jimmy Skunk slowly ambling down the crooked little path, stopping every few steps to pull over a loose stone or stick. They knew what he was doing that for. They knew he was looking for fat beetles for his breakfast. They danced over to him and formed a ring around him while they sang, "Who is it never, never hurries? Who is it never, never worries? Who is it does just what he pleases, just like us merry little breezes? Jimmy Skunk, Jimmy Skunk." Now, not so far away, but that he could hear them very plainly, sat Peter Rabbit, just finishing his breakfast in the sweet clover patch. He sat up very straight so as to hear better. Of course, some of the merry little breezes saw him right away. They left Jimmy to come over and dance in a circle around Peter, for Peter is a great favorite with them. And as they danced, they sang, "Who is it hops and skips and jumps? Who is it sometimes loudly thumps? Who is it dearly loves to play, but when their danger runs away? Peter Rabbit, Peter Rabbit." Peter grinned good-naturedly. He is quite used to being laughed at for always running away, and he didn't mind it in the least. "When danger's near, who runs away will live to run another day," retorted Peter promptly. Then he began the maddest little kind of frolic with the merry little breezes until they and he were quite tired out and ready for a good rest. "I wish," said Peter, as he stretched himself out in the middle of the patch of sweet clover, "that you would just tell me why it is that Jimmy Skunk never hurries." "And we wish that you would tell us the same thing," cried one of the merry little breezes. "But I can't," protested Peter. "Everybody else seems to hurry, at all times anyway, but Jimmy never does. He says it's a waste of energy, whatever that means." "I'll tell you what, let's go over to the Smiling Pond and ask Grandfather Frog about it now. He'll be sure to know," spoke up one of the merry little breezes. "All right," replied Peter, hopping to his feet, "but you'll have to go ask him. I've asked him for so many stories that I don't dare ask him for another one right away, for fear that he will say I'm a nuisance." So it was agreed that the merry little breezes should ask Grandfather Frog why it is that Jimmy Skunk never hurries, and that Peter should keep out of sight until Grandfather Frog has begun the story, for they were sure that there would be a story. Away they all hurried to the Smiling Pond. The merry little breezes raced so hard that they were quite out of breath when they burst through the bulrushes and surrounded Grandfather Frog as he sat on his big green lily pad. "Oh, Grandfather Frog, why is it that Jimmy Skunk never hurries?" they panted. "Chug-a-rum," replied Grandfather Frog in his deepest, gruffest voice. "Chug-a-rum." Probably because he has learned better. "Oh," said one of the Merry Little Breezes in a rather faint, somewhat disappointed sort of voice. Just then he spied a fat, foolish green fly and blew it right over to Grandfather Frog, who snapped it up in a flash. Right away, all the Merry Little Breezes began to hunt for foolish green flies and blew them over to Grandfather Frog until he didn't have room for another one inside of his white, yellow waistcoat. Indeed, the legs of the last one he tried to swallow stuck out of the corner of his big mouth. "Chug-a-rum," said Grandfather Frog, trying very hard to get those legs out of sight. "Chug-a-rum. I always like to do something for those who do something for me, and I suppose now that I ought to tell you why it is that Jimmy Skunk never hurries. I would if Peter Rabbit were here. If I tell you this story, Peter will be sure to hear of it, and then he will give me no peace until I tell it to him, and I don't like to tell stories twice." "But he is here," cried one of the Little Breezes. "He's right over behind the little clumps of tall grass." "I thought he wasn't very far away," grunted Grandfather Frog, with a twinkle in his great googly eyes. Peter crept out of a hiding place, looking rather shamefaced and very foolish. Then the little Merry Breezes settled themselves on the lily pads on the big circle around Grandfather Frog, and Peter sat down as close to the edge of the bank of the Smiling Pond as he dared to get. After what seemed to them a very long time, Grandfather Frog swallowed the legs of the last foolish green fly, opened his big mouth, and began. "Of course, you all know that long, long ago, when the world was young, things were very different from what they are now. Very different indeed. The great, ever so great grandfather of Jimmy Skunk was slimmer and trimmer than Jimmy is. He was more like his cousins, Mr. Weasel and Mr. Mink. He was just as quick moving as they were. Yes, sir, Mr. Skunk was very lively on his feet. He had to keep out of the way of his big neighbors, for in those days he didn't have any means of protecting himself, as Jimmy has now. You know, it wasn't until Old Mother Nature found out that he was taking advantage of the black suit to get into mischief on dark nights that she gave him white stripes, so that the darker the night, the harder it would be for him to keep from being seen. Now, Mr. Skunk was very smart and shrewd, oh, very. When the hard times came, which made so many changes in the lives of the people who lived in the Green Forest and on the Green Meadows, Mr. Skunk was very quick to see that unless he could think of some way to protect himself, it was only a matter of time when he would furnish a dinner for one of those fierce big neighbors. And of course, Mr. Skunk had no desire to do that. It was then that he asked Old Mother Nature to give him a bag of perfume so strong that it would make everybody ill but him. Mother Nature thought it all over, and then she did. But she made him promise that he would never use it unless he was in great danger. Mr. Skunk had to try his new defense only once or twice before his enemies took the greatest care to let him alone. He found that he no longer had to run for a safe hiding place when he met Mr. Wolf, or Mr. Lynx, or Mr. Panther. They just snarled at him and passed without offering to touch him. So Mr. Skunk grew very independent and went where he pleased, when he pleased. And because he no longer had to run from his enemies, he got out of the habit of running. Then he made a discovery. He watched those of his neighbors who were forever hurrying about looking for food, hurrying because all the time there was great fear upon them that their enemy might be near, hurrying because each was fearful that his neighbor would get more than he. It wasn't long before Mr. Skunk saw that in their hurry, they overlooked a great deal. In fact, by just following after them slowly, he found all he wanted to eat. So he grew fatter and fatter, while the others grew thinner. After a while, he almost forgot how to run. Being fat and never hurrying or worrying made him good-natured. He kept right on minding his own affairs and never meddling into the affairs of others, so that by and by his neighbors began to respect him. Of course, he taught his children to do as he did, and they taught their children. And so, ever since that long ago day when the world was young, that little bag of perfume has been handed down in the Skunk family, and none of them have ever been afraid. Now you know the story of why Jimmy Skunk, whom you all know, is so independent and never hurries.
Thank you, Grandfather Frog, cried the Merry Little Breezes. When you want some more foolish green flies, just let us know, and we'll get them for you.
And that's the story why Jimmy Skunk never hurries. And now, whenever you're ready, take a deep cleansing breath in, hold it, and exhale. Taking a moment to slowly regain awareness of your surroundings, to become present-minded in a calm, grounded, more peaceful state. I hope you enjoyed these adult meditative stories and that you follow this channel for more as an opportunity to continue empowering your creative mind, your intuitive muscles, and centering yourself in a joyful, childlike way. Until next time.